purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring about next week's schedule.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, for the purposes of announcing next week's schedule. I yield.
I thank my friend, the Republican whip, for yielding. And on Monday, Madam Speaker, the House will meet at 12:30 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. Madam Speaker, on Tuesday, the House will meet at 10:30 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business.
Will the gentleman suspend? Will the members please take their conversations off the floor? I'm sorry. You may resume.
Shh.
Gentlemen.
I thank the gentlelady. On Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules, including a number of bills focused on improving government operations. Plain Language Act, H.R. 946 by Representative Braley, H.R. 4720, Taking Responsibility for Congressional Pay Act, Representative Kirkpatrick. A complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today, as is the custom. In addition, we'll consider further action on H.R. 1586, the FAA Air Transportation Modernization and Safety Improvement Act. Further action on the jobs agenda is possible, and further action on health care legislation is also possible. And I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. And Madam Speaker, I think it has been well reported that the majority plans to try and use the reconciliation process to ram through a health care bill through this House and the one across the Capitol. And we also know from the reports that it is imperative that this House and the House majority, the members of the majority, must first pass the Senate's health care bill before any other action on a reconciliation measure is taken. The gentleman has announced, Madam Speaker, that all this will take place next week. And I'd wonder if the gentleman could give us a little bit more clarity as to the schedule and perhaps the need for members to keep their schedules flexible through the weekend. I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. First, let me say, no matter how often the gentleman and his colleagues want to say so, we're going to ram through something, no matter how many times the press and public may be misled by that assertion, we're not ramming through anything, I tell my friend. We are following the rules of the House and following the rules of the Senate that have been decades in existence, which have been used when they've been used. 72% of the time they've been used. 72% of the time they've been used, I tell my friend. Your party used them. They are the rules, and we're going to follow the rules. Both bills that are pending before the Congress of the United States have been passed with over a majority, and in fact, the Senate bill was passed by a 60% majority, I tell my friend. Not rammed through after a full year of debate and discussion, scores of hearings, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of hours of consideration. I tell my friend that you can say that we're ramming something through as much as you want, and it will not make it true. No matter how often it is said by your side of the aisle, who, in my opinion, wants simply to stop the legislation in its tracks. I tell my friend that we're going to be in the regular order, as we have been on these bills since they were introduced. We're going to be in the regular order in terms of considering the passage of bills that have received majorities in both houses. And as I say again, the Senate bill has received a 60% majority in its House. Now, the American public, frankly, expect when we vote on bills, they expect things to pass by a majority vote. They do here. They unfortunately don't in the other body. So that you're going to have 59%, as we had in the House, to give children health care, and children don't get health care. So I say to my friend, we're going to, as I said, the expectation is we'll consider passing health care legislation this coming week. We think it's long overdue. We expect the Budget Committee to mark up a reconciliation bill, as the committee did when the Republicans were in charge on 16 occasions. Out of the 22 that reconciliation has been used, 72% of the time, as I want to reiterate, because I frankly get a little impatient with this assertion that somehow a process that you utilize 72% of the times it's been utilized, which means that we used it 28%, that somehow now when we're using it, it is somehow now not consistent with the rules. My friend knows it is consistent with the rules, and we're pursuing that process. The committee, I expect, will mark up on Monday. I expect then thereafter the Rules Committee to meet, as is consistent with the rules, to prepare a reconciliation bill to report it to this floor. I expect them to report a rule to consider that reconciliation bill, and I expect that reconciliation bill to be considered. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, all I asked was whether the members should be prepared to be here over the weekend, and I yield.
No, you said a number of things before that, which is what I was responding to. But yes, members should be prepared to be here next weekend.
I thank the gentleman. And Madam Speaker, without having to delve back into the debate on what makes this health care bill different than the other times reconciliation was used, I think the American people are those that see the obvious. But I would ask the gentleman, since he says we will be employing regular order here, in response to the President's request that there be an up or down vote in this House, could the gentleman give us some enlightenment as to the suggestions surrounding something called the slaughter solution, and whether, in fact, members can have an up or down vote, a clean up or down vote on this bill, or whether there will be some procedural maneuvering, self-executing rule deeming the Senate bill passed. If he could give us some indication of what we may be able to expect next week, and I yield.
Well, of course, as the gentleman knows, the gentleman party has used that process as well, as I'm sure the gentleman knows. But in any event, we will follow the rules. We will have a vote on the rules, consistent with the rules. I have not talked to the chairwoman of the Rules Committee at this point in time, so that I cannot give you a specific response, and have not heard, this is the first I've heard something referred to in the terms you've just referred to it as, but we will provide for a rule for consideration of the Senate bill for reconciliation, and the process of doing so will be consistent with the rules.
I thank the gentleman, and Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask again, consistent with the President's request that there be an up or down vote on the Senate bill itself, can we expect an up or down vote on the Senate bill itself? And I yield. I
thank the gentleman for yielding. What the President was referring to, of course, in terms of an up or down vote, was a majority vote. One of the problems we've had in the Senate, as the gentleman knows, and experienced as well when his party was in the majority, it's difficult to get an up or down vote when the majority of the senators for something. They've got to get an extraordinary majority, some 60 votes, before they can bring a bill to the floor. That process obviously thwarts, does not facilitate a vote by the majority. In fact, a minority in the Senate on a regular basis thwarts the will of the majority. That's what the President was referring to, that he wanted an up or down vote on that, and I expect we're going to get an up or down vote in the Senate. Why? Because in the Senate they have rules that we are going to follow, as you did in 16 out of the 22 times, that allow for an up or down majority vote in the United States Senate. We have to have, as you know, a majority vote in the House, and we consistently do have measures that can fail or succeed depending upon the will of the majority, as opposed to the thwarting by the minority.
I thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker, and I know the gentleman would like to speak to the Senate. We're trying to focus on the House here and what the vote will look like. And since the gentleman has indicated that the President and he and all of America would like to see a vote up or down in this House as well, I'd ask the gentleman whether we can expect an up or down vote on the health care bill itself or not, and I yield.
I tell the gentleman that nothing will pass here without a majority vote.
I thank the gentleman. I take that to mean that there is a likelihood that we will not see an up or down vote on the Senate bill itself, and that perhaps these reports of a concept called the slaughter solution, in which the majority will deem passed the Senate bill in some type of procedural move, that maybe the public can expect that to happen. I know that the gentleman does not think that that represents the kind of vote that the American people expect, but I take that to mean that that certainly is a possibility. Madam Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman whether he expects the House to have 72 hours to review whatever legislation comes to the floor next week, and I yield.
I expect the House to have very significant time to consider the proposals that come out of the Budget Committee and or the Rules Committee. And this bill, of course, has been, either bill, House bill or Senate bill, as proposed, has been on the online for some 2.5 months, otherwise known as about 75 days. So there has been ample time to review the bill, whether it's the Senate bill or the House bill. And so my friend is, I'm sure, well aware of what's in the Senate bill and what's in the House bill. In addition to that, the President put online his proposed compromises between the Senate and the House, which have been the subject of great discussion, including the bipartisan meeting that the gentleman and I attended at the White House, an extraordinary historical meeting in which the President invited leaders from both parties and both houses to come and to discuss what he believed to be an historic opportunity to provide health care for accessibility to all Americans. So I say to my friend that we will certainly give as much notice as possible, but I'm not going to say that 72 hours is going to be the litmus test per se, because that which we have voted on already in the House and the Senate have given members months' notice, and the American public months of notice, on the substance of the propositions that are pending before us.
I thank the gentleman, and again, I'm a little bit taken aback that now the 72-hour rule has been completely cast aside, since no one in this House has had an opportunity to see what is in the reconciliation bill. At least I speak for the members on our side of the aisle that have not had an opportunity to see what's in the reconciliation bill, and I imagine would have some of the provisions that the President in his plan, not the legislation, put up online prior to the Blair House meeting. Again, it's rather disturbing, Madam Speaker, that the 72-hour rule has now been completely cast aside.
Will my friend yield?
I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I didn't, first of all, the 72-hour rule, I didn't say that we were casting aside any rule, nor did I say that we may not have more than 72 hours notice. You may well have more than 72 hours notice. What I said to you was, I'm not going to commit myself and then have a 70 hours as opposed to 72 hours and think that I have violated some representation I made. We want to give as much notice as we possibly can. This has been a very difficult discussion, as you know, and as you well know, the members on your side of the aisle in the other body have indicated they're going to do everything in their power to stop the passage of this legislation. So we need to get about this business and engage, if you will.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I guess the gentleman may begin to understand why it is that some on our side of the aisle, including yours truly, depict this as ramming the bill through. I mean, if we can't even get a commitment that the gentleman, as well as the Speaker, had indicated prior that we would have 72 hours to review any piece of legislation that comes to the floor, I think that that is consistent with the depiction that perhaps there is a ramming through going on, and I yield.
The gentleman has had 72 days, I tell the gentleman, to review the bill that he refers to. 72 days, not 72 hours, 72 days in final form to review the bills. Now, you can keep saying this. You can keep telling the American public that somehow we're ramming something through. You have had, I tell the gentleman, and you know you've had, 72 days at least to review the bill as it stands today.
Madam Speaker, I tell the gentleman again, we are expecting, as he has said, to see a new bill, a reconciliation bill on the floor next week. That bill, no one on our side of the aisle has had an opportunity to see. Perhaps the Congressional Budget Office has had 72 hours to see it, but we haven't. No one, I believe, has had 72 hours in this body to see the reconciliation bill. That is the bill that I'm speaking to.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Let me repeat the process that I'm sure the gentleman knows well. The Budget Committee will meet. They will report out the bills that are to be reconciled. The Rules Committee will then take them under consideration shortly thereafter and will present a reconciliation bill. We will all see it at that point in time. It will obviously do exactly what the instructions that we adopted in the budget a year ago instructed it to do, and that is to reconcile these bills and will have a fiscal positive effect, in my view. I haven't seen it yet finally, but my expectation will have a positive fiscal impact, and we will all see that. But it will be simply following the instructions that the Budget Committee, in the budget that was passed, I don't think the gentleman voted for it, but nevertheless, a majority of the House did vote for it. I know that the other body doesn't like majority will. Maybe that's not the case here, but I will tell the gentleman that, yes, he's going to see the reconciliation bill, and as I said, the reconciliation bill, which will be drafted by the Rules Committee after the Budget Committee reports to it, the process that you followed on a regular basis when you utilized reconciliation, we will hope to have as much notice of that particular piece of legislation as possible. But I tell my friend again, and when he refers to the health care bill, the Senate bill or the House bill, you have had months to review the substance of that bill. You don't like it. We understand that. You're going to oppose it. We understand that as well. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot say that you have not had notice of each and every one of its provisions for over 2 months.
I thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker. And again, it seems as if we're not going to get an up or down vote on the Senate bill in the House, but we will be voting on a reconciliation measure. And the instructions that were included in the budget bill are not legislative text. That is my point, Madam Speaker. But since we are not going to, since we cannot be guaranteed of a 72-hour period for review, Madam Speaker, nor can the American people realize their right to know during a 72-hour period, I'd ask the gentleman whether the reconciliation package will contain the House language referred to as the Stupak-Pitts language, and I yield.
I don't have knowledge of that at this point in time, so I can't give my friend a definitive answer. But as my friend does know, that that language or any other alternative language may not qualify for reconciliation.
I thank the gentleman. I'd just like to, Madam Speaker, read a recently reported statement by the gentleman in which he said it is clear that the matter of abortion cannot be dealt with per se in the reconciliation bill, so we're pretty much going to have to deal with it as is at this point in time. I'd ask the gentleman if that is a correct translation of his remarks, having said today, and I yield back. I yield.
It wasn't a translation. It was an accurate reporting of what I said.
So, Madam Speaker, I take that to mean the Stupak-Pitts language will not be in the reconciliation package.
As I said, we don't believe that any change in that language, because the gentleman is well aware reconciliation needs to deal with budgetary impact. We don't believe that that can be dealt with in reconciliation.
I thank the gentleman. I would say to the gentleman that there was, and I'm sure he has seen, a letter that has been signed by 41 Senate Republicans in which they indicated they would oppose any effort to waive the so-called Byrd rule during the Senate's consideration of the reconciliation bill, which means to me, Madam Speaker, it is far from certain that the Senate will actually pass the bill when the House sends it to the Senate, and in fact would just call that to the gentleman's attention that we stand ready to continue to work in another direction, but it seems to me very much in doubt.
Will my friend yield on that issue?
Yield.
That's an interesting letter. I'm glad you brought it up, because you brought it up in juxtaposition to the issue of the Stupak Amendment. What the letter essentially said is, even if you send over the Stupak language, and we agree with the Stupak language, we will not waive the Byrd Rule. So even though they agree with the policy, they won't waive the Byrd Rule. Why? They want to defeat the bill. We understand that. That's what that letter said, and I think Americans probably, if they knew enough about the process and can't take the time to do what you and I do, follow this very closely, but they know what's going on, and very frankly, it's ironic that 41 senators would say, notwithstanding the fact that they may agree with a proposition that we put in a bill and send it over to them, that they would not waive the rule to adopt the proposition with which they agree for procedural purposes of defeating the bill.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman. I would indicate that in that letter there is no specific language that directly relates to an abortion provision or any other. And the gentleman, I know, agrees that this country has had a long-standing tradition of denying government funding for abortion services. That is the very important issue behind the Stupak-Pitts language. And in fact, 45 senators voted in favor of that language, just as a majority of this House voted for that language, which is why it is so important, I think, that the members as well as their constituents understand that you will not be including the Stupak-Pitts language, the protection that will guarantee no government money goes toward government funding goes towards abortion services, which is why I bring the point up, Madam Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding because, as the gentleman knows, the language in the Senate bill specifically provides for no government funding. I know there's a dispute because there is a contribution towards policies, but as you know, the Senate drew language very carefully to ensure that no public funds were spent for or participated in purchasing insurance for abortion services. In fact, as the gentleman, I'm sure, well knows, the Senate language specifically provides that if those protections are going to be purchased, they must be purchased by separate payment with either subsidy dollars or government dollars, that they must be spent out of an individual's personal pocket.
Madam Speaker,
I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman, if that's his interpretation and belief that this language in the Senate bill protects that long-standing tradition, that may be. However, the U.S. Catholic bishops, as well as Right to Life, have strongly opposed the language in the Senate bill as not having the adequate safeguards to deny government funding of abortion services. So I think clearly...
Will my friend yield?
I yield.
This is an extraordinarily difficult issue, not only for the Congress, but for Americans generally, and for individuals. There is a dispute on this language. He's correct. As he knows, neither side likes the language in the Senate bill. One side, the pro-choice side, if you will, for simplification, believes that the language goes beyond the Hyde language. The Catholic bishops believe it is short of the Hyde language. There is a difference of opinion on that. I think the gentleman understands that well. There are other groups which believe that, in fact, the language that is in the Senate bill does, in fact, do as I have projected it does, precludes any public dollars from being spent, which is consistent with the Hyde language. I tell my friend that from our perspective on this side of the aisle, there is no intent nor objective of changing the Hyde language in any health care legislation that is adopted. The President's indicated that's his intent, that's our intent, and that's why we are proceeding in the manner we are.
I thank the gentleman for the clarification of his intent. I would just say again, the Catholic bishops, as well as the Right to Life organization, stand very much in opposition to this language. I stand with them. I'd ask the gentleman, Madam Speaker, that the parliamentarian in the Senate has ruled that the Senate cannot take up the reconciliation package until the Senate-passed health care bill is signed into law. That is the bill, Madam Speaker, that contains provisions such as the Cornhusker kickback. And I would ask the gentleman if it is his position that that would be the case, that this House must pass the Senate bill first. It must be signed into law before the Senate can even take up the reconciliation package. And I yield.
I think the gentleman correctly states the Senate parliamentarian's position, and therefore I think the gentleman is correct on that observation. I might say to him that while I do not know the entire thrust of the reconciliation bill, I can guarantee him this: the reconciliation bill will take out that Nebraska provision which offended him, offended me, and I think offended people across America. Not because it advantaged Nebraska, but because it advantaged Nebraska unequally. I think the gentleman is going to be pleased that Nebraska will be treated like every other state, and in fact every other state will be advantaged to the same extent that the senator wanted to make sure that Nebraska was advantaged. But the Nebraska provision to which the gentleman speaks, and which all of us felt was inappropriate, will be changed.
I thank the gentleman, and in closing, Madam Speaker, I look forward to working with the gentleman in trying to refocus the issue of this House on getting Americans back to work. And the gentleman did indicate that there will be further action in what he is calling a jobs agenda. Certainly that didn't happen today, as we are here already having finished the legislative business of the day and only having considered a bill dealing with algae. I only mention this because 52% of Americans do think that jobs and the economy are the nation's top issue. And by contrast, only 13% of Americans think that health care is our nation's top priority. This was according to a CBS New York Times poll. So I do thank the gentleman for his willingness, hopefully, to get back to the question of how we get America back to work, and I yield back.
Yield?
I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.